Today, we're very happy to have Dr. Paula Winke as a distinguished guest speaker in our tracking class. Dr. Winke received her PhD in Applied Linguistics at Georgetown University. She is a professor in Department of Linguistics and Germanic, Slavic, Asian, and African languages at Michigan University. She is teaching and advising students primarily in the Second Language Studies PhD program and MA in TESOL program. Her primary area of research is second and foreign language testing and assessment. Along with her primary interests, she has also conducted and published numerous studies within the area of instructed SLA, TBLT, technology media L2 instruction, among others. She has also made great contribution to eye tracking research with her colleagues at Michigan State Universities. She has numerous publications from top-tier journals in our field, such as language learning, language testing, studies in second language acquisition, the Modern Language Journal, TESOL Quarterly, among others. Currently, she is a co-editor of the journal Language Testing. She has received numerous awards of her publications and her research projects. The most recent one was Act for NF MLJ Paul Pimsleur Award for research in world language education in 2021. So please join me welcoming Dr. Winke.
I'm going to be talking about multimodal processing and the cognitive load. There, okay, all right. So with the Captions Project, we were looking at the effectiveness of captions and factors that may influence the effect of captions in learning, okay. So we know that captioning promotes L2 comprehension and vocabulary acquisition during video-based listening activities. That was one of the first studies that Sue and I ran with Tanya Sodorenko, the Russian RA or TA. And L2 learners pay attention to and read captions. We found that in that early study, one of those early studies as well. So the first study was in Language Learning and Technology, the second one in the Modern Language Journal. Okay. And the factors influencing the effect of captions, we found the differences between the scripts, between the L1 and the L2. And we've also found content familiarity. If you know a lot about dolphins already, it might affect how much you need to pay attention to the captions. Some of the technical terminology, you may need to use the captions more. Then in this paper for 2019, we were also looking at how working memory plays a role, because when someone is right at the cusp where the video is a little bit harder than they're able to understand, the question is, does their working memory help them make that leap to process it a little more? Or is working memory not invoked? So those were some of the questions we had. And I have some demonstrations of the different working memory tests that we used in this PowerPoint. But does someone have a good definition of working memory that they can give right off the bat, just to make sure we all know what it is and why it's kind of important in language? So she said it has to do with the storing of information, which is rote memory, right? So I say something to you in a foreign language, ni hao, ni shi shama, right? So I ask you something, ni shi shama, and then you put that in your short-term memory. Okay. And then what's the second part? Processing. So yeah, you have to store and process at the same time. So what could be, think of a sentence that I might say and you have to process it as well. My daughters do this all the time. They'll say, Mom, I was late for school today. I think you need to send a note into my teacher. And I'm cooking. So I'm listening to her and it goes into my short-term memory store, into something called the phonological loop. So I'm sitting there stirring. I'm thinking about not burning the food. And it's gone into my short-term memory. And it's playing there in the loop. And my daughter will say, Mom, did you hear me? And I can repeat it back to her. Yeah, you said that you were late for school today and you need a note sent to your teacher. And she will say, but did you hear me? Did you process that? She's saying. Because then next thought I need to have is, oh, I need to send the note to the teacher. So that's where I was doing two things at once, and working memory, if it's good, will help you hold all that and process it at the same time. But in a language classroom, also you'll hear the new sentences, you'll think about them, and you may compare them to what you already know. New vocabulary will be in there, and you'll be thinking back to what's in your long-term memory store, right? Yeah. So you may be retrieving information from your long-term as you process the short-term, and these loops of information that come together is working memory. And we can think of it too, it's easy to operationalize when you think of getting sentences, and then we ask you to keep in mind the last word of each sentence. And after we tell you 3 sentences, we'll say, now tell me the last word of each sentence. So that's kind of a quick measure of working memories. How long can those sets get? Can you do that for 3 sentences? Spit back out the last word. How about 4? How about 5? How about 6 or 7? People, you can try and get a rough estimate of their working memory using those types of tests. Sound interesting? Do you think it might be implicated in using captions? How so? Because you just did it. You just were watching a video. Yeah. Khadija was saying also it was taxing. So she would get, if she had to pay attention to the audio and the captions at the same time, over time, she would get tired. So maybe a higher working memory would help keep exhaustion at bay. Don't know. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can think of how working memory might work with things. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So the use of captions in working memory. So we know that we have the images, which is part of the visual field that you're taking in when you're watching the video. And there's also verbal working memory. So we say that working memory, people have visual working memory, and they also have verbal working memory, or acoustic phonotactic working memory. And we also have the captions, which are both visual and verbal. And we do get what Khadija was noticing with that memory load, how it is taxing to do all of it at the same time. So we have different things with the use of captions. We have 2 things. Sorry, the text got cut off a little bit. We have the dual coding theory. So we know that things are, there are benefits when you're able to process in multiple ways. So students who are able to hear and read, they can access either one for processing, and that dual multimodal encoding of information can help people. That's why we use PowerPoint, right? Because we know that the visual along with the auditory is better. It's just richer information. So those are the multimodal benefits. But then what Khadija was noting as well is that there's this cognitive load problem that if you put too much on the person to do at the same time, it'll start to fail. It'll start to irritate them. I think, Matt, you said that it was, you didn't want it there. Who else said they didn't want it? That it was a little bit too much having the captions there all the time. Khadija. All right, so knowledge is stored both verbally and visually, and the information from 2 channels is better processed than coming from 1 channel. That's the dual coding theory. And then with working memory may be able to help you balance this load, or balance the benefits. Because working memory is limited in its capacity and duration, learners cannot process information from multiple sources at a time. As a result, they become cognitively overloaded. So that's the warning that students' working memory will be taxed too much. Okay. So we had some gaps from the previous research at that time when we started working on this, in probably about 2015, 2016. It's been acknowledged that working memory plays an important role in multimedia L2 learning with multimodal input, but there had been little attention to empirically test the effect of the individual differences in working memory on caption-aided L2 comprehension. Okay. So here's our purpose, boiled down for you, okay? We want to investigate the relationships among the presence or absence of captions, the processing of captions in working memory, capacity based on the dual processing theory using eye tracking methodology. So far, so good? Okay. Sounds like a good use of the eye tracker, right? We had fun in the lab. So the effectiveness of captions. Do captions facilitate L2 comprehension during video-based listening activities? So this is a question that we were repeating because it would verify some of our earlier studies. Then question 2, do learners with high working memory capacity outperform learners with low working memory capacity in caption-aided learning? And if so, is this effective working memory more pronounced in the caption group than in the non-caption group? Are there differences between successful learners and less successful learners' eye movements on the captions? So just kind of a general exploratory question about whether they would use the captions differently. And successful and less successful would be on the listening comprehension exam. Okay. All right. So for this study, we had second language learners of Spanish from RCS here at MSU. And we had 46 students in total come into the lab. And the experimental group, we kind of randomly, as they came in the door, student 1 would go to the caption group and student 2 would go to the non-caption group. And we just did that throughout the experiment to have it randomized, not within subjects, between subjects design. So 2 different groups that we would look at. Okay. All right. And we had a bear story from National Geographic. So it was a great story. It was about this mama bear. She has these cubs, and she was protecting her cubs from a predator bear, a male bear that would kill the bear to be able to be with the mother. So there's a chase scene. There's lots of music and splashing and fish. It was just and a lot of good vocabulary. Something that I now think about is we only had one accent in this. So it was a single narration. So when you're thinking about the accents and how that comes in, we've not looked at that with captioning yet. And I don't know anyone who has. Right. Keo asked what directions they got, and it was the latter. We asked them to just watch the video. We told them we would give them a comprehension test afterwards. So they knew that they were watching for comprehension, but we didn't tell them to pay attention or not pay attention to the captions. We were just like, here's a video we're going to show you, and then we're going to have you take a comprehension test. All right. So just to back it up a little bit, why with the eye tracker? Because we follow and believe in the eye-mind link, and that is the theory that overt attention and covert attention are tightly linked, right? So we think that what someone's looking at, especially in an environment like this, is what they're thinking about. So we believe that. And in general, maybe not all the time, but in general, we do believe that. And the processing of captions, we use the eye movement measures of first pass reading time and rereading time. So do you know what that is, those measures in particular? Because if you don't, that's okay. We'll pause to make sure everyone gets it. What would be first pass reading time? So as you're reading this, let's say we're interested in this text, processing of captions. And what would be the first pass reading time? Like, how would you make a metric of that, a measure of it? So we'd have an area of interest around processing of captions. And okay, yeah, so the first time your eyes look at it, you'll spend some time in there, and then you'll leave that interest area. So that first pass reading time is the amount of time spent during your first pass through of the interest area. So it'll be in milliseconds, right? So we're looking at first pass reading time. Because we're thinking with captions, people go into the captions area and they read it, and then maybe they go back up to the video. If they go back down, we weren't sure what to do with that. So we thought it'd be the largest measure and probably a most consistent measure of whether someone is watching the captions. And rereading time, what would that be? Yeah, so if you do pass out of it and you go back to it, the rereading time is any time you go back to it, how much time. So we have, I guess what you would think of as early processing of text and later processing of text, which might be two cognitively different things or two reasons for doing those. We're not sure. What do you think? Are those good measures? Would you add something else? I think back then we didn't pre-register studies, right? I think now we would register and we would say ahead of time what metrics we were using. Because I'm trying to think, we might have done more measures, but didn't include them in the paper, and now they're forgotten. Maybe we did those analyses. Maybe we calculated those things. So that's where pre-registering your research study would really be helpful, because then you have to document what you did, why you did it, and if you didn't do it, it's still there. You'd put it in, like, I don't know, you'd run it and put it in the supplemental file. I don't know. But pre-registration would give us that history, I think, of what we were thinking back. We were looking at captions as a whole. You could, with the iLink, Tatiana, she did some looking at key vocabulary. The iLink 1000 is accurate enough to get at individual words. We didn't do that with this study. We might not have done total reading time. Well, okay, I think it has to be a percentage, because the captions are only on the screen for as long as it takes for them to be said. So Tanya is the one that actually made the captions for this. She used a video editing software, and the area of interest appears when the captions appear on screen, and then they disappear when the caption goes away. So she had to timestamp the measurement of the area of interest. The metrics would start when the caption appeared and stop. And then Tanya had some choices, like what happens if they just so happen to be looking here when the area of interest appears on screen? We had choices to count it, discount it, or split it. So I believe she did the split. And the iLink, it asks you those things and like advanced decisions or advanced features, so you can make those types of decisions. And I don't think we documented those, but probably you'll want to document those in your methodology as well. Yes, I think first pass reading time and total rereading time would equal all of the time in there. But each caption is there at a varying amount of time and it's a varying amount of length. So that makes it a little wonky if you're looking at captions. I can't remember if there were 72 individual captions in the video of varying lengths and time. So captions research gets a little difficult to manage data-wise. 42. Okay, that's how many captions there were in this study. Right? Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right. What this looks like is you can see the red ball is where the eye is focusing. And I think something we wanted to show here is that the captions are actually in the eye tracker. The way we set it up is that the video is a little higher up. I think I talked about this when we were visiting the lab, that the most accurate eye movement metrics on your screen, be it the Tobii or the iLink or whatever, is in the center, because the angles are shorter and there's less distortion of the eye. So the calibration is usually better in the center of the screen. So we did this study by trying to get the captions close to the center as possible for more accurate eye tracking on the captions. That makes sense? All right. So here's another thing that we were experimenting with. Remember, my specialty is in language assessment. So in our first studies, we were using multiple choice tests of listening comprehension. And I think in those original studies, we had like 15 multiple choice questions per video, something like that. And it was really hard to get that many multiple choice items that were good, right? So we could make a middling comprehension test, but it was really hard to make an excellent comprehension test. So we decided with this study to try two different ways of measuring comprehension. So we used our multiple choice test. It had 14 items. answered the questions below by circling the right options, and it was binary scoring. But we also tried something called a free recall test. And this is something that Sue and I designed based on idea units. I think it was Claire Crampsch who originally came up with the idea unit scoring. And in this one, we had them type out or retell the story from the video. Please provide as many details as you can. There's no time limit or word limit, and you were able to do it in whatever language you wanted. In English, you're L1, or if you wanted to throw some Spanish in there, no problem. And just to show you what that looked like. So they did both. They did the multiple choice and they did the free recall. And I think we gave them the free recall first and then the multiple choice so that there was no lead in. I can't remember though exactly how we did it. And Sue Gass and I wrote a paper on that, on idea unit scoring. And we published that in the Applied Linguistics Forum. We were asked to publish on that there, so we did. And that's an open access short article on like how to. So what do you think we're going to find? 14 items for the multiple choice versus this type of free recall. What do you think are the differences between them, just off the top of your head? She said they probably liked the free recall test better than the multiple choice. Do you think we'd get the same scores? Do you think they would correlate? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, kind of an empirical question, right? Yeah, that's a good question. If we had allowed them to type, would they write more? Because people don't write by hand very much anymore. I think later, Liz Huntley did another study with us on Arabic captions. I think she allowed them to type. Like it was in that iLink lab on the second floor. They have those computer terminals. I have some pictures of her doing this, so I can pull up the pictures. I think she had this sheet of paper on the desk. She said, you can type it or you can write it. And I can't remember that one. Liz has that paper right now. And I can't remember how many students chose to type and how many students wrote it out by hand. Yeah, they definitely might type more and you might get more information. Yeah. Typing skills would be perhaps a variable you'd want to control. Okay. All right, then we gave different reading span tests. These poor people who came into the lab were there for quite a while. So they did a verbal working memory test, which had those two tasks that Joanne was talking about, processing and storing. So they would get a sentence. Mary went to the store with Matt and bought some milk. And then is that a plausible sentence in English? Yes or no? Because something could be non-plausible. Steve jumped out the airplane and landed on the ground but didn't get hurt. Something like that. Is that plausible? No. So something like that. There was a plausibility judgment and then, or it might have been grammatical, ungrammatical. And then there was a letter presentation, and then they had to recall the letters after sets of 3, 4, 5 words. Okay. We also did, here's the reading span test. Let me go back. Andy was stopped by the policeman because he crossed the yellow heaven. So does that make sense or not? The sentence makes sense. You'd say false. And you'd get the letter J, right? You saw that pop up. And then you get another one. The prosecutor's case was lost because it was not based on the facts. You guys storing these letters? Sentence makes sense. And that. And you wouldn't be able to write it down, right? You would just be auditory, but feel free to write it down. Okay. It was, this one was reading, but you couldn't write it down. You were supposed to not take notes. And then select the letters in the order presented. Use the blank button to fill in the forgotten letters, okay? So these types of tests, have you seen memory tests that you can borrow from Engel's lab? Have you guys taken a look at that yet? Some have, some haven't. In psycholinguistics, you will. If you are doing research and you want working memory tests, I highly recommend you go to Engel's lab. It's just type in your computer Engel, E-N-G-E-L, is that right? L-E, and then working memory lab. they have many different working memory tests that you can download. We downloaded several of theirs. And then Dan Isbell, who was working with me and Sue, we had him translate many of the working memory tests into foreign languages. And then Dan sent them back to Engel. And they are now on the website for download too. So you'll see Dan Isbell's name next to them for the translated tests. They're in Spanish, Korean, Arabic. I can't remember all the languages that Sue and I were researching in these caption studies. Those are all the languages that we translated them into. Did you find it, Matt? Okay. So that's a good thing. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But also with Qualtrics and Google Forms, if someone gave you the nuts and bolts of it, you could put a test online, a working memory test to run by yourself as well. If you don't have the software that Engel uses, I think he was using, I forget the name of it. The software that runs it is ePrime. So if you don't have ePrime, have no fear, because you can replicate this in Qualtrics or something like that too. So if you like working memory, start talking to other people, talk to me, talk to Eileen to get the working memory tests that you want for your study. And you probably want multiple or 3, because they say working memory, you can get at it from all different angles, from visual, auditory, reading, there's all types. So let's see. Yes, we did this symmetry span test. I think this one from Unsworth et al. And this one I used in my dissertation as well at Georgetown. So back then we had to program it ourselves. So I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore. So visual spatial working memory, it's testing this symmetry judgment and a matrix recall. So what happens with this one is you get a grid with different parts of the grid filled out. And you have to then remember where the blocks were and select the cells in the order presented. So you can see that let me go back through it. You have to remember the placement of these as you look to see if this is symmetrical or not. That's the task, is this symmetrical or not? And you would have to quickly make your judgment, and then you see this. And after certain sets, then you have to say where those squares were. Okay. Okay. Results. All right, so you got in your head what we did. We brought people in. They watched with captions or without captions, and they also had the working memory tests. So does captioning facilitate L2 comprehension? And when we had them broken up into groups, we had the multiple choice test comparison and then the free recall test comparison. And we found a significant difference in the free recall condition. Oh, we found it in both. But with a larger effect. Okay, so why is that? When you think of testing reliability and validity, why do we see the effect in the free recall more than we see it in the multiple choice testing? Yeah, and with the multiple choice tests, all 14 questions were presented, and people gave a response to each of the 14 questions. So there might have been some guessing in there. Yeah. We had not a very large dispersal of scores, right? Whereas with the free recall test, they were allowed to spit out whatever they wanted. And sometimes people got 6 idea units, 10 idea units, and they could get more. But we found that there was a more normal curve with the free recall test. There was a better distribution of scores and a larger standard deviation, right? So part of it too is that we thought the free recall is just a better measure of comprehension differences across the subjects in the study. But I think we had the issue too where we thought the multiple choice test would bring up 14 things that might lead in and feed into the free recall. Like it's what's interesting about the free recall is it's free recall, right? So they may have understood things that they just didn't mention, right? So I think there's a lot to look into between these two different types of measurement of listening or video comprehension. But yeah, and those studies, we haven't spun off on those, but there's a lot there that I think is interesting because it impacts the results of the study as well, effect sizes. And that's right, that's right. In the video, the bear, there's the bear, some people, when they watched the video, they didn't understand that the papa bear was actually trying to kill the baby bear. So they would write, oh, and then the dad came, and he doesn't see them very often. So they were happy to see him. But really, the bears were like screaming of fear. So, you know, in the free recall, we really could tell, we didn't subtract for wrong information, but you could, right? Because we got a lot of information there, like they really didn't understand that. And we were only scoring for positive, correct information. Yeah. And one of the multiple choice, it was, you know, it's infanticide, which was one of the words that only high-level people got. And in Russian too, I think bear cub is like little child bear, something like that. And so a lot of the vocabulary that came out in the multiple choice test construction would give away a lot of what's going on. So, but measuring language is a difficult thing. Measuring comprehension is, you're always just probing, and you may hit the spots that you're, you know, looking for something, and you may not. Yeah, so that was a fun part of the study too, trying to wrap our heads around how to measure comprehension. You'll see that most studies on input flooding and video-based comprehension, they use multiple choice, and we can challenge that. Okay, so do learners with high working memory outperform learners with low working memory in caption-aided learning? We divided the caption group to 2 subgroups based on the working memory scores. You can comment on this because we didn't have like an empirical definition of what high working memory is. We just divided the group and said, you guys are higher than those guys who are lower. So not real scientific. I know Khadijah's laughing, Kia's laughing. We can laugh, it's all right. But that's what we did. I've seen other studies that do that too. More we need like indices of working memory tied to these working memory tests. So again, standard setting, Matt, for working memory with the definitions of working memory, you know, none of that work has been done. It'd be really fun. Yeah, but maybe the psychologists out there are working on that somewhere, but definitely needs to be done. So we divided the caption group to 2 subgroups based on the working memory scores. So with our caption group, we had 23. So we had 10 in the low and 10 in the high. Visual spatial, we had also 10 and 9. So we had those divided into the different groups. So the results with working memory is we found that there was no difference for the multiple choice test, but for the free recall, it was significantly different, where we found the low working memory and the high working memory had different working memory tests. All right, with research question 2.2, we did find the effective, if so, is this effective working memory more pronounced in the caption group than in the non-caption group? So again, we divided the caption group and the non-caption groups to subgroups. So we had the low working memory group and the high working memory group. I think we had the buffer. I think we might have removed the middle. That's what happened. Okay. And then the non-caption group, low and high. That's right. We had the buffer group where we didn't use them because we didn't want a direct split between high and low. Okay. So we found a non-significant interaction between working memory and captions, but a very small effect size and low power. We had pretty low power. So we wonder if we had time and money to collect data from more people, if it would have become significant then, meaning that we could generalize beyond the population. So within this sample, there was a small effect, but we can't say that it's significant outside of this study. So the effective working memory was not more pronounced in the caption condition than in the non-caption condition. And then with question 3, are there differences between successful learners and less successful learners' eye movements on captions? So if you remember, we had a large standard deviation on the free recall test. And we divided the caption group into 2 subgroups based on the free recall test scores. So we had the low scoring group and the high scoring group. And so we just have descriptive statistics here, where we show that the low scoring group had the mean of 4.44, and the high scoring group had the mean of 12.64 IDEA units. And the standard deviations that are there, min and max. And for the first run dwell time, there was no statistical difference found, but a medium effect size. And we have that on the second viewing as well. So this is the first run dwell time, so how much time they look at it. And in the first viewing of the captioned video or the second viewing, and they had first run dwell time, no statistical difference was found, but a rather large effect size. And here, so if we have the ones who have the lower score, they are not using the captions as much, right? People with the higher score are using them. Why is that? Is it the load issue? That higher working memory, higher scores, you're able to use the captions more. They were using them more. The question is why? Because they were helping them, and did that extra help then lead to higher comprehension scores? It's kind of chicken and egg. You don't know which one's first. And with rereading time, what we found was a significant difference on the second viewing and how they use the captions the second time through. Okay. First viewing and second viewing. So we showed the video to them twice. Showed the video to them twice. And so in the second viewing, they have a little bit of a different behavior than in the first viewing. And here, the high score group was using the captions less. Makes sense? Okay. Less successful learners spent more time rereading the captions during the second viewing than successful learners did. Oh, wait, that's right. So it seems like the less successful learners were trying to gain more information from the captions than the successful learners were. Okay. Using it as scaffolding. Okay. So just to summarize, with the effectiveness of captions, captions promoted L2 comprehension during video-based L2 comprehension, we think, especially with the low scores using them more. In working memory and comprehension, the learners with the higher verbal working memory outperformed the learners with lower verbal working memory on the free recall test. However, this effect of working memory was not more pronounced in the caption group than in the non-caption group. So a little bit of salt. Then eye movements on captions and L2 comprehension. The learners with lower scores on the free recall test spent more time rereading the captions than the learners with higher scores, right? So we see in the class differences in proficiency, perhaps, and whether they use captions or not. So who's teaching language right now beyond Steve? Anybody? Oh, you are too. You're teaching English. So now that you know this, think of your students in your class. If you showed a video with captions, knowing this, can you picture in your mind who would use captions more? So can you see their faces in your mind? And do you think that it would help them because they need the help? I mean, I guess I'm trying to get into your mind of looking at the students in your class. Are they homogeneous in terms of their proficiency levels? You're both immediately shaking your heads no. How big is the range of proficiency? Okay, so you're saying in a measure of differences, this is a great measure, by the way. It takes them 2 minutes longer to process the information you give them. In your class, sometimes, Steve, it'll take 5 to 10 minutes longer. So they're not a homogeneous bunch. And Beth Ann, I think you can imagine the people who are at the lower levels. So there's a fallacy often in language classes that we give placement tests, so students are all the same. Once they end up in the classroom, they are similar in terms of proficiency. But that's not true, especially at a place like MSU, where it's so big and we only have so many classes. So they're being placed into Korean 201, but they come either with 4 years of high school, 2 years of high school, or they went through the 1-year Korean program. So they may have a very large range of proficiency. And the takeaway here is that if you use captions, you may be making your content accessible to the lower end of the proficiency spectrum. Like it might help bridge the gap between those who can do it without captions and those who absolutely cannot. I don't know. For teachers, I think captions can help equalize the proficiency differences in the class, hopefully. And maybe the working memory differences too. Yeah, so the value of captions during L2 video-based activities. The findings support the claim that a captioned video is beneficial for L2 learning, right? Motivation, interest, making things accessible, teachers being able to use more authentic materials. The extra help and comprehension from captioned video may come from the additional activation of a nonverbal, perhaps spatial imagery-based system. Prior reports of captions as detrimental may indicate mismatches between the viewer's L2 proficiency and the difficulty level of the video. Yeah. Okay, so the effects of the test format, free recall versus multiple choice. Working memory are only seen with the free recall testing, the effects, which is a more fine-grained measure of comprehension. So I think our idea units, we had 64 possible. So we had a checklist, like, did they get this idea? Did they get that idea? And we had listed out 64 from the transcript of the video. So they could get many more than 14 points possible on the multiple choice test. They could get 20 or more if they actually wrote it all down. With free recall testing, there are more points possible and must do more than just identify correct responses. They have to infer what's important and then remember it and then write it down. So there's a lot going on with free recall. This matches works by Altkin and Ertzen, who discussed that working memory capacity influences students' inferencing, their inferential questioning, but not remembering or interpreting facts when L2 reading. Interesting, right? Okay. So the findings shed light on the importance of multimodal input in that captions help learners scaffold information from the auditory and visual movie picture input, leading toward better overall comprehension. And the effects of working memory was not more pronounced in the caption condition than in the non-caption condition, which indicates that multimodal input that included captions was still effective even for the low working memory learners. All right. And we also found that the findings supported the cognitive load theory, that learners with low working memory capacity showed relatively poor performance on the free recall. And due to the limited capacity of working memory, low working memory learners in the caption group might have been cognitively burdened compared to the high working memory learners when processing 3 sources of information: captions, images, and audio. And I remember Dan and Sue and I talked a lot about whether, these students hadn't used captions so much anymore, but things are changing over time. Teachers are using more captioned videos now than they did 5 years ago. YouTube was invented in 2004, right? So you can think of this using captioned video as the research needs 2019 are already getting old fast, right? Because technology is changing. But we do think that maybe with teachers doing captioned videos more often, students will get used to balancing captions, images, and audio. So we would hope that we've talked to the faculty about every Monday start class with a 4-minute video summary of the week, from the news, from China Central Television or Korea Today. Get them used to watching videos with captions to see if they can get, better used to processing multimodal input. Okay. So individual differences in working memory capacity should be carefully considered when designing multimediated L2 materials with regard to that cognitive load. And we also, Insuke and Kotzeglu's interview data provided evidence of the learner's cognitive load. So we think that studies should do more interviewing of the students afterwards to find out how they're using it. So this one person, I'll put the red quoted part, I'll read that. I thought that I could read the subtitles when I could not hear, yet I was puzzled a lot and could not choose what to focus since my brain was divided into three. So that's a good point. So when you're really struggling to hear and it's pushing your language proficiency, you're at your capacity of comprehension, then it is a struggle to try and process the different modalities. You may have breakdown in comprehension. Right? Mm-hmm. Less successful learners, prolonged rereading times indicate their difficulties in processing the captions, which may be indicative of the split attention effect. Sweller said, don't have too many modes, or people will have to decide and then things will fall apart, basically. So there's a little bit of that here. But individual differences in ability to read captions should be taken into account when using caption video in L2 classrooms. And I would like to comment that Sweller's split attention effect, it's not that you believe or not believe. So you could say captions, multimodality is good, or multimodality will lead to problems in attention. I think over time, sometimes you're going to have this split attention effect. And most of the time, I think it's going to be beneficial. So I think both theories can live at the same time. Both theories are right. There will be instances of split attention effects that I think we can identify, but that doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should still use captions, even though sometimes it'll be frustrating for our students, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, individual differences in ability to read captions should be taken into account when using caption video in L2 classrooms. And something we saw too when Sue and I also did research with different languages. And you'll notice that some of our studies talk about the reading native English speakers learning Chinese or Arabic. It takes them a much longer time to learn to process captions, that the reading in Chinese is a very denser process with characters carrying more information in a smaller amount of physical space. And sometimes that processing of captions is more burdensome than learning Spanish or French even, where the captions are at a kind of a reading pace similar to what we do in English. So some of these different L1s, maybe Korean too, what should be easy may not be easy for L1 English people. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So that's it for that part of the study. Mm-hmm.